All right, let's get started. So let me share my screen first, and then I won't take too long. So let's see. Yeah, welcome everyone. So this is the NVDIA the quarterly webinar. This is the last quarter webinar we have. So today we have two guests from two different companies. One is Eric from Roche. The other one is a CEO and engineer from Robin and Nick from the Affairs. So they're going to talk about two different perspectives from the industry. So, but before that, I'd like to quickly spend 2-3 minutes about NVIDIA's latest release, 2.7.0. So what we have done in this release. It's a long release, frankly. Take us more than 6 months to complete. So we pack a lot of features, and so there are some of these features are highlighted here and what's new on our documentation. The first one is a confidential federal AI. So essentially what we have done is with Flare plus confidential computing, we enable end-to-end IP protections for on-prem. So for this deployment is first on the AMD CPUs and NVIDIA's GPUs using confidential VM. So this kind of an end-to-end protection, which means is not just deploy the confidential computing with a runtime, because that's what the confidential computing is about, but also for deployment time, because as you know, the federal learning, we need to deploy the softwares on the other host we not necessarily trust. So this enable multiple things. One is, of course, a traditional secure aggregation on the server side, but also the model theft protections. So the model IP won't be stolen on the client side while training, but also because we packaging the trusted softwares in the training code or inference code in the client side within the confidential VMs. So we also have data leak protections. So frankly, our release not only for on-prem, but we also have Azure solutions. But in that case, it's just for secure aggregations and client-side training. So in that case, you can find more on this on the link. So I won't talk too much about that. The second features, the core features we had, is we call it job recipe. Literally, if you look at the code, this is all most of the code is like on the right-hand side. Let me move this a little away. So essentially, you define a recipe with your training script. The training scripts in a Flare's client API, literally 4 or 5 line code on the existing PyTorch or TensorFlow code. It wasn't nothing specific. And then you're just, if you want to add a tracking, so you can add experiment tracking, and then you put an environment, whether you use simulations, in Flare term POC, like you can simulating locally deployment or production, literally the same recipes. So it's very simple, 4 or 5 lines of code. So there's, of course, a lot of details. The other pieces of information we release, we felt is important, is this port consolidations and with the HTTP driver. We had an HTTP driver, but it was slow, so we rewrote it with a new async IO HTTP drivers. So the significance of this, and if you're using Flare before, we previously asking server to open about 2 ports. So every time you need to go to IT to set up the server, you need to open the port. But with this new changes or release, so we only require 1 port. And this port can be simply 443, the existing already open port, use HTTPS, and you with this HTTP driver. This driver is on par with the gRPC, so this one will simplify the requirements. So the next release, we have a lot of security enhancements, and we probably don't touch too much details here. The other pieces we have developed is this hierarchical FL. So the hierarchical LFL is basically saying, okay, I don't need all the client connect to the servers. I can put a different region, have a different, we call it relay nodes in between. So, and how many layers, the tree-like structure is up to you, depend on your different systems. So this enables essentially millions of devices could be connected. There's other implications. I was talking to some customers, and even they don't use a device training for these cases, and for other purposes, they want to leverage this. So so there's a hierarchical pieces with this hierarchy pieces, and with also across edge deployments, and we also develop asynchronous asynchronized FL. Most of the Fed originator is a synchronized way that most of the clients come back and then move forward. With this async, algorithms, and you don't need to do that. So, finally is we basically enabled mobile trainings with a cross, platform. We support both iOS and Android, and this is on top of by leveraging the Meta's actual torch. So, this the key features Flare has is not just say, hey, you can run on the mobile devices, but without device programming. So in other words, you don't need to learn Objective-C, Java, Swift, Kotlin, all these device programming. You don't need any of those. As long as you have your PyTorch models, and then Flare will take care of that. So that's and then of course, if you say, well, I don't have so many iPhones or Android phones, and what we do, and then we develop all these simulation tools, so you can literally, simulating, hundreds of thousands of these devices, and together with your, physical phones. So, those are the major features. We also, as we talked before, but we finally complete is this self-training tutorials, which contains, I think it's 105 notebooks and 80 videos. And so this is like a 12 chapters, complete end-to-end descriptions of the federal learning and the Flare and the features. So, and so this is kind of a new release. We're super excited about this. And so, I just want to share with the community on this release. With that, I'll stop sharing. So let's introduce our first speaker. First speaker is from Roche. It's Eric. Eric has been working with a Flare for several years, and then we have close collaborations. And he's a product manager of Federated Open Science at Roche, and together with his colleague. And please, Eric, take over, please.
Thank you, Jess, and also thanks for sharing the new release highlights. Much appreciated. Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Eric, as introduced by Jess, working in Roche for the informatics organization, and fortunate, to be leading and working with a diverse and quite talented team focusing on the global development and adoption of privacy-preserving federated computing capabilities to scale our company's ability to access more diverse data from real-world healthcare settings. Also very pleased to have Frederick with me today, co-presenting and kind of partner in crime. And please, Frederick, say a few words about yourself too.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Frederick, working in medical affairs, neuroscience, and scientific lead of our Federated study program. Basically leading the data strategy and evidence generation in the MS franchise here at Roche.
Right, and in the next 20 to 30 minutes, we will touch on our Federation journey, in particular in the field of multiple sclerosis, where we successfully are using Federation to enable international research collaborations. Frederick will start with the business context and a perspective from the disease. Then we will move kind of to the implementation of a federated network as an alternative approach. And lastly, we will also cover considerations on our technology or on our current technology approach. For the ones on the call who don't know Roche, let me briefly share a few words about who we are and what we are doing. Roche is a global leader in healthcare. We are one of the world's largest biotech companies and a leading supplier of in vitro diagnostics. Our innovative portfolio and pipeline goes across major disease areas, including oncology, neurology, infectious diseases, ophthalmology, and lately also the cardiovascular metabolism space. Again, for me, and I'm sure Frederick agrees to this, it's quite a privilege to actually lead the federated learning capability development at Roche and help shape it for our needs and make it work at scale for us. Now, starting kind of our talk, Frederick, when you go back in time and reflect on your early memories, expectations, thoughts when actually stepping on this federation pitch, what comes to your mind? Do you want to share a little bit, a few reflections from that time?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eric. And upfront, I want to apologize that I have to drop a bit earlier because I need to pick up my kids from daycare. So I will drop halfway kind of the presentation when Björn takes over, so I won't be there for the Q&A. But happy to present the initial part and happy to answer this question, Eric. So yeah, basically we started this journey with an ambition to basically further develop kind of our data-driven science capabilities and really believe in a future where a large part of science, as I'll present, is basically data-driven, right? And we're moving from a kind of hypothesis-driven research setting to kind of integrating also a data-driven part. And I think that was the ambition of this project. And we were, for the first time, really integrating kind of teams, and Eric and I worked very closely together to set up basically this network and the capabilities to enable federated studies, which we now have set up at Roche as a capability. But yeah, it's been rough. The journey has been long, but yeah, I think a lot of learnings along the way in how we set up these studies, and obviously we partnered with the FARIS that were along for the ride, or along for the rise. Maybe they were basically we were collaborating very much in setting up these capabilities, and FARIS supported Roche as well in really setting up the technology for the federated study as a concept. So yeah, I think in summary, and I think you'll see that in the presentation, there's a lot of learnings, a lot of capability buildings, and we're hoping to share some of that in this presentation. And Eric, maybe you can share kind of your perspective.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. Yeah, for me, I mean, thinking about this, it sounded like a revolution to me, at the beginning, and to a certain degree, it is still today. This feeling of no one has done anything like this before at Roche created a strong momentum and gave me and the team a lot of energy, right? Certainly, I think many of us, including myself, not being prepared for the time it will take. Frederick said it was rough. Yes, I can support this. It took quite an effort and time, obviously, to move the needle, to do something different, and basically go through these phases of crawling, walking, and I think we're not there yet where we can say we are running successfully, right? But if you think that also the federation approach kind of got public attention with the Google paper in 2017, I believe it was, and please just correct me. I think NVIDIA launched the first NVFlare version 2019. I also must say I'm proud of our pioneering and achievements at Roche regarding federation as an innovative approach to data access and collaboration in real-world healthcare settings, right? Also looking at the time scale and now referring to the famous Gartner hype cycle, which talks about federation to reach its plateau in 5 to 10 years. I would say, we are currently finding our way out of this trough of disillusionment and entering the slope of enlightenment phase. So I'm looking forward to the next 5 years, basically, and definitely there is more to come.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, kind of what we see is kind of a true paradigm shift from hypothesis-driven research to data-driven research, and we at Roche are very familiar in kind of driving science and driving clinical trials to develop new drugs. And this is often based on a hypothesis and a lot of testing in early clinical, where then this is further validated in our clinical trials. And now we have kind of a world where we have a lot of data, we have a lot of opportunity to drive insights based on data, look for correlations that are not kind of visible.
You mute yourself by accident. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I don't know. I wasn't touching the keyboard, so. Yeah. No, so basically, there's a lot of opportunities to drive research in a data-driven way, to leverage AI, to look for new correlations that we cannot kind of see just by rationalizing them, right? So there's a limited amount of variables that humans can process at the same time, approximately 7, where AI can process kind of millions at the same time, right? So there's a lot of opportunity there to look for new patterns, correlations, especially in kind of in the multimodal realm. Next slide. And so I want to start kind of with emphasize or kind of clarifying or providing a little bit more context about MS, which is the disease area that I'm focusing on, and this initiative that we're discussing today is focusing on. And it's basically in multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is a chronic disease. It's a chronically debilitating disease, but very heterogeneous. So it's basically inflammation in specific parts of the brain. Those parts of the brain are very diverse, and so depending on where you have inflammation, basically it's an autoimmune disease causing inflammation, and depending on where that is located, you get complaints of cognitive issues, sensory issues, fatigue, pain, muscle or mobility impairment, walking difficulty, etc. So depending on the location, you get certain symptoms. Let's say for the past, 20, 30 years, there's been a lot of development, and also by Roche, in developing new treatments for MS, where patients basically are very much helped, but it's not yet, we're not able to completely stop the disease yet. So, and that's kind of also now coming to the unmet need, is where there's a lot of high efficacy or highly effective treatments available. Patients are progressing more slowly, but because of that, it's harder to measure which patients are actually progressing. And that is harder for us in our clinical trials. So in terms of our endpoint, we need to find new, more sensitive endpoints, and find new biomarkers that are able to predict progression in the disease, but also for clinical practice, where in the past, the emphasis was not on measuring progression because that was not what we needed, because you could look at, for example, lesions in the brain that could help you determine whether you should start treatment and based on what the patient was telling you. But now measuring progression is increasingly important, and also biomarkers that are able to predict progression. So that is something that is kind of the context and pretext of the networks that we are building, leveraging federated infrastructure. So if you go to the next slide. So another thing on top is kind of the value of real-world data beyond clinical trials. So basically with clinical trials, you have a very controlled environment. You have quite a homogeneous population where you really go deep in terms of the amount of measures you take, repetitively. So patients visit every 3 months, you take MRIs, you take blood, you take cerebrospinal fluid. So you really collect a lot of data, but on a very limited number of patients. And once your drug is on the market, you need to support that with real-world evidence. So how generalizable is your trial? You know that the drug works, but does it work equally in every single patient? And that's where real-world evidence comes in. On top, there's a lot of insights you can get in terms of, like I mentioned, like biomarkers, and looking at much larger populations and collecting kind of big data to drive new insights and look for new correlations. And that's where kind of real-world data comes in, is where you have a large breadth of data. So a lot of people, but usually that data doesn't go very deep. And that's kind of the figure, it's kind of the reversed iceberg, or kind of an inverted mountain, where you have a very broad array of data, but only little, it goes very deep. And with depth, we mean kind of multimodal data. And with the federated network that we have built up, we aim to go kind of have a full breadth of data, a broad view of the full kind of diverse population in MS, but also go deep in terms of multimodal data, having imaging, having biomarker data, having biosamples. Hoping and our ambition is to really drive kind of the understanding of MS as a disease, but also drive a new development of biomarkers so that we can predict progression earlier, treat MS earlier, so that we are able to stabilize and hopefully in the future can cure the disease. If we go to the next slide. So some of the opportunities I want to show here is this is a collaboration we did with Novartis and a big MS registry is basically using machine learning to explore new classifications in MS. So MS has certain clinical subtypes. Here, the group used a Markov model to basically find a data-driven way of describing the disease. So looking at, let's say in blue, it's basically early disease that is not as debilitating, and in red, you have advanced MS, so people in wheelchair, advanced disease. And in between, you have other disease states like people that are relapsing or that have acute progression and recover afterwards, but also a disease state where patients are basically asymptomatic and have perhaps radiological disease activity, but not clinically. And what I want to show to you is kind of that the disease is not kind of linear, right? So people switch disease states, they go back and forth, but in the long term, it is a progressive disease, and that is something that we need to treat. But also, this shows that there are different types of MS, and there's different kind of phenotypes in how MS is presented, and it's not as simple as the 3 clinical phenotypes we currently know, but the view is much more complex, and we only kind of scratched the surface in terms of how this could look like. And for that, kind of a multimodal view is critical to really understand how biomarkers are impacted, how specific subgroups are impacted, and that's kind of our objective with the network that we've built. So if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so these machine learning initiatives require access to data and require basically big data. But this is one of the biggest hurdles that we have, is there is so much data being generated in healthcare, and now with AI scribes, that amount of data will only increase, but it's very difficult to share that data. I mean, physically sending imaging data or genomic data across, I don't know, 20 different sites is you're talking about terabytes. So that is not only kind of physically challenging, but also because of regulations, security concerns, IP considerations. So there's a lot of hurdles associated with sharing data and collaborating on data. That's why we came to Aferis to ask basically for a solution to overcome these challenges. And this is how we basically started working on the federated concept and federated analytics and federated learning to support collaborating on data. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, so Eric will tell a little bit more about the federated nature of what we built.
Eric, we can't
Eric,
hear you.
You're muted, Eric.
Yes, sorry. Just because Frederick needs to jump off. Any immediate questions for the initial part? Otherwise, happy to move on.
Just a quick question. So when you say multimodal, what type of multimodal you're talking about? Is image and genomics, or image and text, or what exactly, what type of model?
Yeah, so it's basically clinical data, clinical outcomes data, treatment data, so therapies, disease-modifying therapies, but also imaging, so either imaging measures or raw imaging data, and genomic data, but also biomarker data like single-cell RNA-seq, so kind of a mix of text and imaging data. Yeah, and yeah. Exactly. And
all right.
Eric will, yeah. So I mean, Eric will. Eric, are you okay to go over some of the use cases? Yeah. Yeah, because basically we experimented in imaging in clinical separately to build kind of capabilities. But Eric will tell you more about how we approached it and some of the use cases that we have tried and built. So apologies that I had to drop, but thanks for the opportunity to present here.
Super, thanks, Frederick. Right, as you heard, creating these larger scale, also multi-country heterogeneous cohorts that are needed is difficult, right? It's in the meaning it is also slow, it is costly, and often rather impossible to do, right? So we mobilized this multidisciplinary team, cross-functional team at Roche to actually also transform the industry academic collaborations. And some of the things that we I guess want to consider as the takeaways also for this presentation is that we consider privacy by design from the get-go, and not as an afterthought, to reduce also burden of all the legal agreements that need to happen for such collaboration, but also to flip kind of the status quo and not just trusting contracts and agreements only, but actually trusting technology, which is surrounded by also a solid legal framework, right? And speaking about trust, trying to model trust, right, or let's say increasing the trust between the parties, between the collaborators through technology to beat and overcome this trust transfer challenge, with the result that hospitals remain in full control of their sensitive data at any time, increase the interest as well as the willingness, to sign up for this, right, and for these kind of collaborations. So we also touched on that, it's not happening overnight. So there's a lot of, work happening behind the scenes over the years. And I think also to call out that, iterating with dummy data, with synthetic data, and, doing, smaller pilots here and there to increase understanding as well as confidence with hospital stakeholders, but also with internal teams, especially the data science community, and also enable work and task parallelization is quite a must-have to get something like this off the ground. As you heard, we definitely believe that such a federated data network facilitates better collaboration and will increase and accelerate access to fit-for-purpose data to meet our evidence and data needs, right? Now, however, the simple and attractive idea of data is not moving, unravels obviously in healthcare very quickly, underscoring also the promise of the federated approach, as well as the complexity and challenges that come with such a manner. Now, within this network, we started with 3 federated studies, basically implementation studies. Yeah, so it's not a proof of concept. It's not really a pilot. It's real world studies, and all had a different medical scope, different objectives, different data requirements, as well as different data science focus points. These studies, fortunately, come now to an end very soon, and they laid the groundwork for what's next within that network, for that network, but also serving as a blueprint now internally for new collaborations outside of MS, right? So other disease areas, they have similar needs, unique needs, but the need for, let's say, tapping into longitudinal real-world data remains in other diseases valid as well, right? So with such an approach, we were kind of aiming to address different stakeholder needs and interests, as well give the teams on the ground space to experiment and iterate while learning from each other between the studies, but also from real world implementation. Yes, we also had to do simulations, but very importantly, all 3 studies dealing with actual patient level data, production infrastructure at hospital, and of course with concrete medical research questions, kind of basically justifying why we're doing this, and not just for the sake of we love and have fun with federation. No, there's a business need behind it. Now, you have heard, Frederick speaking about federated analytics and federated learning. So we have an initial focus mainly on federated analytics, which is the statistical part, and federated learning. We have less experience. Doesn't mean it is less important, but we kind of started with, okay, we need to figure out federated analytics first, and there's a reason for this, right? I think overall our experience now, our learnings is federated approaches, whether it's more on the statistical part or on the machining part, they provide a viable and effective alternative to centralizing, let's say in our case, multi-site real-world data. Now, everything that you need to make this happen, you need to also, test and, validate, from a technical point, framework, workflow, or, platform infrastructure-wise. Now, there's stuff to do, but it's also rather, simple. What sometimes is being, underestimated, but, equally important is kind of the analytical validation, right? This is very much needed to actually also convince the data scientists that, this federated approach, works in the same way or even a better way when I want to do my survival analysis, right? From a methodological, from a mathematical, statistical approach, right? They need to have this confidence and basically the evidence that this works, right? Because they believe only what they see. And so this meant, we had to take a few extra rounds while setting up such a network to also cover kind of these, increase the data science confidence that this approach, also makes sense from a statistical machine learning and from a mathematical perspective. A few more words about federated analytics. You heard that real-world data, observational healthcare data provides a valuable resource to understand variations in the populations and certain patient subgroups, right? Characterizing these populations through the use of descriptive statistics is an important first step in generating hypotheses, but also very importantly to assess, data suitability. Such analytical characterization provides, first, step kind of top-level set of summary statistics about the data profile or cohort profiles at each hospital. They also describe, population in terms of its aggregate medical histories. It describes, sequences of intervention a patient, received for a duration of time. It measures the occurrence rate of an outcome in a population for a time at, a certain risk level. And these kind of descriptive methods basically, describe the population relative to an event. And so that we can say, okay, we put the cohort, a patient cohort together with a baseline measure and so maybe 2 or 3 follow-ups to highlight this longitudinal aspect that we require, right? And this is why we believe federated analytics is very important for us, and kind of this got our initial attention, but we are also looking more and more into the machine learning side of things. But I think it was important for us to make this differentiation between federated analytics and federated learning. The next kind of aspect to worth highlighting is governance. Not in in the bad negative way, but we look at governance as an enabler. And there's so many things or aspects surrounding the federation, and some of them are need to be managed through a governance model. Governance can mean a lot of things, obviously, for many people, but for us it means it enables collaboration, which is obviously a prerequisite for federation in such industry academic collaborations. I guess many of us know that for research questions, teams spend most of their time on effort simply for discovering, accessing, contracting for, and cleaning, preparing data. And only, let's say 20% is spent on the actual analysis or on the actual machine learning, evaluation or, inference round, which then, potentially drives the scientific discovery. Now, for this 20%, this is where mainly maybe, federation, plays plays a core part, right? But there's so much before that that is very much important. And so the way it's done today, it's not a sustainable model. We're not just losing time because of these labor-intense activities upfront, but also losing opportunities to generate more new scientific meaningful insights. So I think a recommendation, if someone is thinking about building a network such as our MS network, help to solve also this 80-20 problem, right? And don't it's not about reinventing federated learning and come up with another NVFlare or as a competition to NVFlare. It's not about this to really generate impactful results. Now, for us, speed to insight, certainty of access, eventually also good data suitability, while navigating quite a complicated maze. In these collaborations are surely key value indicators for us at Roche, and I'm sure also for other industry players. Quickly, another important design consideration for us is also to develop a study agnostic solution that ultimately can serve many parallel studies and disease area use cases. So it's not a one-off thing, and we each time want to start from scratch. No, we want to build this in an sustainable, scalable way. There is still work to do, and yet discussing solution scalability questions from the beginning is definitely worth time spent, right? For us, it's also critical now to meet our Roche users, our data scientists, where they are, increase the integration into a known common UI and UX data science experience. So far, we had this kind of separated, but now there's more momentum, there's more confidence, right? So that we actually can make this more part of the common Roche data science solution stack. At the same time, we also want to avoid that the product is built for a scale that it never achieves. In other words, production is too costly to sustain, at low levels of demand, use cases, studies, or value only exists at high levels of demand, right? So from a technology development and delivery perspective, this is a challenge. Moving at the speed and availability of use cases while exploring the latest advancements, is tricky. So we had to crawl before walking, and I think slowly we are getting also ready for running at scale speed. Another perspective on our current approach to drive the development and adoption of Federation that we follow internally is, following a product management concept. There are obviously, many things that need to happen before a job execution, or an Epheris compute gateway can work. In particular, when we think about an end-to-end solution offering and individual stakeholder needs, right? So classical consideration about build versus buy, building up technical expertise, but also practical experiences when it comes to implementing Federation. So today we have, let's say, an NVFlare base surrounded by unique features from Epheris and specific in-house features, including also the narrative and the value case accountability within Roche, wrapped into this federated open science product, right? Overall, this offering, this federated open science product, is also part of a larger tech and solution landscape at Roche, giving our clinical and medical research teams, a set of opportunities to, engage and contribute to external data collaborations. I think also worth mentioning the exchange with the external world, is absolutely necessary for us. We value a lot, already said many times, all the collaboration exchanges with Chester and the team. Of course, also very happy to have Epheris as a tech partner at the table, actually spending, all day tomorrow with the guys. So looking forward to this, but also the many other exchanges with the federated community, the practitioners and other, experts, like also the Flower team, right? There's so much knowledge and expertise, and, very much welcome and, encourage everybody to also exchange and help each other to move the needle and kind of help each other to grow this as a really like a must-have capabilities for the industry. Final perspective on kind of our technology approach is, behind this, simplified high-level view, you can imagine it's quite a dynamic space and busy, tech solution stack behind this, right? This view helps us to organize our work, but also set priorities. Give you an example, when we came together and started, we focused on infrastructure federated computing. And I would say today, this is not anymore a concern for us. We kind of master, these two dimensions so that we can actually focus on some of the other dimensions, right? But also in these days with Gen AI, agentic workflows, and kind of rethinking certain activities, how can we reliably build in LLM workflows to improve our data activation pipeline, right? How we can expand our statistical toolkit with a more conversational low-code experience, right, which is more intuitive for users. So there's so many opportunities, on top of, let's say, the core of Federation, which is quite exciting. But we also want to, reuse, repurpose what is already available and proven so that we don't have to do all by ourselves to kind of complement this offering. Let me conclude with a few, I guess, pointers. In our experience, clear granular research questions with also aligned statistical analysis plan and data management considerations is super essential for a smooth study execution. The success, of course, depends on the data and as well as on early data discovery and data quality control to ensure, yes, the data is suitable for what we want to actually to do. I think also this cross-functional interdisciplinary collaboration that are required, so involving many different stakeholders or roles, is very much needed, as well as direct access to staff at the hospitals, right? Availability, timely communication between the collaborators are really key to make meaningful progress and deliver accordingly. Then also, I think aligning planning expectations with internal, hospital clinical research processes and stakeholders is super critical. I mean, you might be surprised what we all kind of discovered in terms of local tech requirements. So be prepared for this. And then, of course, starting simple, consider it as an iterative, incremental process. It's easier to explain and obviously also helps to increase trust. But at the same time, it's also important to show near-term accomplishments and return of investment to build momentum, but also help to bridge or navigate to this longer-term aspiration and value that teams are setting out. With that, I think we hope that this kind of resonated with you. I think on the example of MS as a disease, which is quite heterogeneous. I think you can see that there is an opportunity where the disease can benefit from cutting edge technologies, and they rely on vast, diverse, multimodal cohorts to actually generate new insights, drive innovation in diagnostics, treatment, patient care, and utilizing Federation to increase depth and breadth of data while combining academic and industry data sets through Federation, potentially also through other privacy enhancing technology, is going to make a difference, and with that also will ultimately benefit the entire MS community. With that, happy to take a few questions.
Thank you, Eric. Since we don't have a lot of people, so you raise the hand and go ahead, unmute yourself and just ask the questions.
Yeah, thank you. And hi, I've heard the Roche team talking a couple of times on this call, so it's always very exciting to see your progress. So thanks for sharing. I just wanted to ask, in terms of hospital data and hospital collaboration, you're looking at federated learning. Do you need to combine that with other privacy enhancing technologies to get the full buy-in, or is federated learning on its own sufficient? The fact that you never move the data you bring the AI to the data. Is that sufficient, or do they ask for additional encryption on top of the data, layering other privacy enhancing technology? I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so I would say I think federation probably is good enough for the moment, right? Obviously, there are case by case consideration and an assessment on how much security, privacy versus utility, user experience you need for that given use case. But I think complementing it with many of the other privacy enhancing technologies, I think becomes it's becoming overloaded for the hospitals, right? Especially, I mean, Jester, right? Confidential computing, we talked about this, right? I mean, equipping, the hospitals with this, fascinating, hardware, I mean, is not an easy thing, right? So, confidential computing, while, it sounds great, and, we're looking forward to, to try it out, but, from a realistic hospital perspective, on top of federation, hardly, I guess, for the moment, right? Because of, local hospital infrastructure needs or maturity levels, right? But so I would say, federation, I think, definitely covers a lot of ground, and then it's kind of maybe use case specific, right? Where maybe you want to, allow, from a certain, statistical binning, that maybe if you go into the statistical, workflows where, you establish thresholds where certain number of records can't be returned back because they hit this number of records that under 10 patients the computation is blocked, right, because it's too sensitive, right, or too revealing. So there are maybe these kind of things from a statistical point of view, but I think again federation to start with serves or covers a lot of ground, I would say.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions for both Eric and Andre? Go ahead. Unmute yourself. You can just ask a question directly. I thought he raised a hand, but maybe not. You can ask a question about the Eric's talk and also on the early the other colleagues' talk, Nicholas' talk. So, okay, so if there's no more questions, yeah, I guess you can.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
It's Andrew from Fraser Health in Canada, in Vancouver. So this is very new to me. Federated learning, extremely interesting. So I would say I'm up for awareness here. Are there ways to learn more about the open, is it federated science? Federated open science and about so not specifically NVIDIA maybe stack, but the whole approach. So what would be steps to to learn more and someone working in hospitals, so be prepared for things that might come as a federated learning.
Yeah, so I think the federated open science concept is like a Roche branded thing, right? So happy to of course set up a follow up with you to kind of give you more perspective there, as much as I feel okay to share. But then when it comes to NVFlare, I think there's a lot of good material available, or other federated frameworks with good documentation, good use cases, good tutorials. So I guess I would start there, but then feel free to reach out to me if you have some specific interest on how we maybe manage this at Roche, right, with all the things that are needed from a healthcare industry perspective.
Thank you. Yeah,
sure. I post the NVIDIA's tutorial website on there, and that has the documentation. You can link to the GitHub as well as all the videos we put it there. There's we got like probably close to 200 examples. So if you want to read it, there's tons of them, and it also has the 2024 NVIDIA Flare, NVIDIA Flare Day, which it has the reporting there. the 2025 recording we haven't uploaded, and we're in the middle of it. So, but you can see the talks, including Eric and Robin and many others from healthcare, financial services. Johan's talk is there as well. So, so we're gonna upload pretty soon. Actually, Holger already split the video. We're just in the process of uploading them. Okay.
Amazing.
So,
thank you.
Sure. I apologize to somebody who posting some random stuff on the chat, so I kicked them out. So, so, but anyway, so our next speaker is Robin and Nick from Aferis. And so you already heard Aferis names from previous talk, and you know, Aferis is also another close collaborator with NVDIA So we actually working so close. I mean, we are actually in our next doc release on the memory related issues is directly contributing by the Aferis engineer. So so we're looking for get that a new release pretty soon. So without further ado, and you know, Robin, please.
Awesome, Chester. Thank you so much. And Eric, I'm on my way to Basel, so after this I'll jump on the plane. Cool. Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We'll speak about a different use case today, which is in the field of co-folding that we brought. And let me quickly share my screen. So, Chester, just as I don't see you, can you just confirm that you are seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So we are speaking about AI drug discovery networks, and in particular in the in the context of co-folding, doing a deep dive today. I have as well Nick, one of our principal machine learning engineers at Aferis, with me, who will go into let's say the intricacies of running large models. Co-folding models are quite large and complex models. In the real world, and what that meant in terms of implementation. So for all the, let's say, people that really want to get more hands-on, real world experiences from the tech side, there's as well a section on this. So I'll quickly set a bit the scene. Why can I not go to next slide? Let me try once more. Okay, cool. Now it's working. Cool. So quickly setting the scene. Generally, we are seeing that pharma companies, let's say, increasingly spend more money to bring drugs to market. We call that the EROM's law, so the opposite of Moore's law. Essentially, what you see on that graphic is that over time, the costs to bring a drug to market just dramatically has increased, and that's of course a challenge that anyone working in the pharma and biotech industry knows. It's just incredibly hard across the entire funnel. Now, of course, we live in an era where there is hope, and a lot of people, companies, or as well business units within companies have put their hope on AI, and in particular in the, let's say, earlier drug discovery stages, there are key models that have really been groundbreaking when it comes to having impact on an industry and solving, let's say, fundamental problem an industry has faced. So in 2021, there was AlphaFold 2 that came to market by, it was published by Isomorphic and DeepMind, and it solved, it was called the to-date biggest AI breakthrough. That was the biggest AI breakthrough probably before ChatGPT. And what AlphaFold 2 did is, based on the sequence of a given protein, predict the structure of that said protein. And that was a big, big challenge in the entire industry. And so AlphaFold 2 solved that with very high accuracy. And so you could really say that problem of predicting the structure of a given protein based on its sequence has been solved by AI. Now, the reality is that in order to lead to that breakthrough, there was data that has been captured in the public domain, the protein data bank. So very large data repository that was created over more than half a century, so more than 50 years. That essentially was the let's say, publicly available data that led to that breakthrough. However, even though it's great that you now can predict a structure of a given protein with high accuracy based on its sequence, when you look into computational drug discovery teams, you see that what they really need in order to kind of optimize their decision flows is the modeling the interaction of molecules. So whether it's protein-protein interactions or antibody-antigen interactions, or a protein interacting with a small molecule, these aspects are these interactions of molecules are critical to enable drug discovery and drug discovery workflows. And so the next revolution from, say, protein structure prediction is what we call co-folding. So essentially, how the name already says, how do two molecules that are put together, a protein and a protein, or a protein and small molecule, how do they co-fold? So what type of complex do they build? And so there as well, a public model has been released, AlphaFold, or a model has been released, AlphaFold 3. That is not public, it's from Isomorphic and DeepMind. But it's not commercially available or open source. But that's the key kind of next revolution that many parties are working on. Now, the challenge with these set of models, co-folding models, but as well many other drug discovery models, is that there is insufficient training data in the public domain. So again, the Protein Data Bank is that large public data repository where many structures are solved, but for co-folding and, say, interactions with small molecules, the proprietary data of pharma companies is much richer. But as you can imagine, that's very IP sensitive and cannot be shared. So to make that a bit more concrete, so here is essentially a breakdown if you look into the public data repository. So we have 242,000 structures. That was essentially the training set that led to AlphaFold 2 and the respective breakthrough. But if you look at the number of complexes in the PDB that have drug-like molecules, it's just 2% of that. So a much smaller data domain, and that's as well here the key statement from Dr. Al-Quraishi, who we work with from Columbia University, who's building these co-folding models. OpenFold 3 just came out last week. So that's the key challenge that the industry faces. However, there is a solution to that, which is tapping into the proprietary data of pharma companies. So the 5,000 publicly available protein small molecule complexes with small molecules that have drug-like properties can be 5x'd by bringing 5 top 20 pharma companies together. So the individual pharma companies have multiple thousands of such complexes. So you get a meaningful increase in training data if you could bring such pharma companies together. And that's exactly what we do here in the AI Structural Biology Network. So this is an example that is one that we will be speaking about today, and as well have made a couple of announcements. So these 5 pharma companies here, Takeda, AbbVie, J&J, Astex, and BMS, they collaborate within the AI Structural Biology Network use case around OpenFold 3. And we are the technology partner here to support that collaboration, provide the infrastructure, and as well help with the whole modeling. As you can imagine, the whole aspects on governance, privacy, and security are really critical here. So we have as well a deep dive slide on this, but of course this data is very IP sensitive. So making sure the IP stays protected is an absolute necessity here to enable such a collaboration. So a bit more on co-folding and how that works, and then Nick will speak about the federation of things. So a couple of interesting insights on co-folding models. So co-folding models are already getting adopted by pharma research teams to guide things like structure-based design, to prioritize hits. So if you have a virtual screening campaign, you can prioritize hits and as well use essentially the predicted structures to do that. Or as well, we see increasingly affinity predictions, which is, of course, a central piece for selection of the right compounds, and affinity predictions based on structure. So essentially, you use the structure prediction as an input to build an affinity prediction model that is then more of higher quality and more reliable than say affinity prediction models that don't consider the structure of the complex. So these are typical use cases. However, if you look at the, let's say, reality on co-folding models, there are various different models. We spoke about AlphaFold 3, but there's as well a couple of open models out there. You see that the performance of these co-folding models really differs across different research tasks. So what you see here is essentially the data, the validation data here. This is from runs and poses. The validation data structured or clustered according to their similarity to the public training data. And so what you see is the performance here, the LDDT of protein-ligand interactions. The performance drastically decreases the further the data is out of distribution compared to the training data. And that's, of course, something that when you look at real-world usage is quite important, because pharma companies have, of course, a lot of use cases where the public data does not have the respective examples in the training domain. Another graphic that shows this is, which I found quite interesting as well, is this one where you look at kind of a public OpenFold 3 and then a fine-tuned model compared on the validation data set. And you see essentially here this y equals x would mean they would be exactly the same. And you see the fine-tuned model is better, but not in every example. And so here really what this shows is the choice of the model matters, but you don't know a priori which model is actually the best one, whether it's the fine-tuned one, whether it's one of these different versions here, maybe even different checkpoints can lead to different results. And so what pharma companies need to do in order to adopt these models is do proper benchmarking and, of course, validation. So really assess how these models are predicting their area of research, and as well enabling medicinal chemists to validate these predictions, just look at them. And then downstream customize these models to their own proprietary research tasks. So this is an example of a locally fine-tuned model against a, let's say, a baseline here of the open model. And you see fine-tuning really makes a difference here and works. So that's a bit of context to co-folding, why fine-tuning and, let's say, enriching them with proprietary data, but as well why benchmarking and validating is so important. And so going forward, we'll speak a bit about the Federated OpenFold 3 initiative. And so for that, I'm handing over to Nick.
Yes, thank you. Hope you can all hear me all right.
Yes,
there'll be a few numbers in that section. Please don't feel, don't remember them, but hopefully they'll give you some idea of what we're talking about. First, we're going to step with how we approach this, because this was quite a big project. We had to coordinate with multiple companies. So we decided to have a very kind of like set schedule and timeline for it. So the idea was to start with first evaluating the model, which was OpenFold 3, which was not released at the time, and looking at the kind of the results to kind of establish a baseline and also make sure that the data was prepared in such a way that it could be ingested by the model. Then we'd move on to second step, which would be to fine-tune the models individually on each farmer's data. And the idea there, again, is to get a baseline of what you would get outside of Federation. And finally, the kind of ultimate step would be to train on all the data in a federated way. It turned out that in practice, it didn't really happen as clearly as we hoped, but essentially the steps kind of merged together, but that was fine. And in the end, we got what we achieved to do. So if we could please go to the next slides. Excellent, thank you. So what we did, well, we did step 1 and step 2, and finally in step 3, we trained multiple models. As you might know, in machine learning, you rarely get it right the first time. Actually, I don't think it's ever happened to me, as far as I can remember. If it were, I'd be pretty suspicious of the result. So we trained, essentially, we looked at multiple runs with, we changed a few parameters, but the main parameter that we changed was the amount of public data that we would mix into the training. The fear was that if you didn't use any public data, you'd kind of forget So you'd have a model that's pretty decent at on the pharma data, but wouldn't be good at what it used to be good at, which would be the public data. So we mixed 10%, 90%, 50%, just to kind of get a spectrum of the training regimes. And we also changed a bit the batch size. This was mostly for performance reasons, as well as we'll get into it a bit later. The data prep was very important. It could have gotten very complicated. We decided to keep it relatively simple. We essentially filtered out any training examples that look too much like the kind of like there's this benchmark called runs and poses, this kind of like the state-of-the-art benchmark. So we removed any sample that looked too much like this benchmark to avoid the data leakage. And finally, we did a 85-5-10 split. The 5% might seem a bit low, but the idea was still that we want to use as much of the data as possible, and we do want a robust test set, so we had to do with a rather small validation set, but that was kind of a trade-off worth making. All right, so how does it work? Well, essentially, the pharma, like what we call the data custodian, is the entity that holds the data, and that data stays in their network. So in this case, it was the pharma companies. They will deploy a gateway. So this is our product, and the product will orchestrate the computations that happen on the data. So above the product on top of that, so it does orchestration, but also does governance and handles like the privacy aspect. So the custodians have to opt in to a specific version of the code that runs on the data, so that they know exactly at any time what has run on the data and what is running on the data, so that they can check the code, all of that. And the federation will happen, so a computation will run on all the sites and periodically sync into the like a central orchestrator server. These syncs will be only the aggregated kind of like the weights of the model. So this will be aggregated and then sent back up to the clients, and this preserves privacy, because we never, like at Affairs, we never see the data, which doesn't make it easier to train, but from a privacy perspective, that was key to enabling this initiative, is that we would never encounter the data. So it stayed in the pharma network. This was the key, kind of one of the key functionalities that we bring with our product. So next slide, please. Right, so just a bit of context on the OpenFORT 3 model. So it's not the biggest model out there, but it's not small either. It's got about 2.3 gigabytes of weights. It was trained on 256 H100s. These are very decently expensive machines. Also, they needed a fair amount of them. It took months to train, not the whole model at one time, but just the iteration to get to something that was running. And finally, there was an interconnect between so this is a GPU cluster, so there's individual machines, and they all communicate with each other at very high bandwidth using, I believe it's InfiniBand, about 25 gigabytes per second. So next slide. Right, so now we've set the scene a bit. So what did we do for the setup? So first of all, there was kind of a heavy infrastructure, sorry. We had, it had to be done 5 different times. So of course the process is the same, but every pharma company will have different compliance processes, will have a different network. For example, one of them had 6 firewalls that needed special exceptions. So this is where, for example, NVFlare comes with MTLS by default, but in this case, you really want to use TLS, because with MTLS, you have to go into like certificates and everything. So we avoided that. Another company decided a month into the project, this was a company-wide thing, we were a small project, to use, I think it was Windows desktop. So everybody was doing remote sessions, which completely saturated the network. So our latency was divided by 100. So that was something interesting that happened. Storage as well. The data from the pharma is relatively small. Relatively, it's not small, but compared to the public data, which is terabytes, we had to find a way to kind of mount everything in a fashion that the model could consume. So that required setting up volumes, which was an additional kind of little point of friction. And finally, compute availability. So these machines, the machines that we needed are not machines you can just get on demand on Amazon or whatever cloud. You have to book them in advance. And depending on the region, they might not be available. So it was like a whole orchestration to get everyone to get the machines more or less at the same time and running the platform as well. One thing we learned was to check everything everywhere all the time, because something that was true yesterday might not be true today. This would be data availability. Can you even get it without on the platform? On the client, is it, did some file name change? Did the path change? Is the GPU available? Is the driver version the same? Did Amazon change the base image, the volumes multi-correctly? Everything that would be relatively trivial in a centralized setup becomes a bit more, a lot more difficult, let's say, in a federated setup. But with our platform, we were able to minimize kind of like the amount of additional complexity and get this running. The network thing is also something we can't control, so we have to monitor it. Finally, it was very important to have very high observability, at least control over our observability. If you monitor from the application itself, there are things you're going to miss, and these things could be critical, especially because our initial approach of asking for the logs didn't scale well, plus there was a time difference issue. So we implemented a way to kind of get all the logs. This was opt-in, the custodian had to enable this, and there was an option for filtering, but then we could access logs from the entire application, including kind of system logs. So that was kind of key to getting this done, but still within the bounds of the compliance of every company. So next slide, please. Right, so we come to kind of the main challenges. Of course, there were a few more than these, but I'll just touch on them briefly. One of them that I think Chester alluded to was the server memory usage was very high, and it was kind of growing higher with time. So usually this is not a problem, but these runs, because we didn't have as much compute. So we had 5 farmers, 8 machines. 5 farmers, 5 machines with 8 GPUs. So that's a total of 40 GPUs. If you compare that to the 256 the model was trained on, you can see that it's not the same kind of order of magnitude. So these runs kind of were expected to take a long time, and and the memory growing over time was not ideal, especially because when you run out of memory, it's kind of pretty challenging to troubleshoot. It's not always obvious. Anyway, we implemented kind of a more bespoke, less memory intensive way to stream the weights back and forth through the client and the server. So that was made possible by NVFlare's eventing system. So that was quite nice to hook into that. NVFlare has a lot of things you can do if you're willing to look a bit at the internals. Finally, network throughput. No, not finally, but secondly, network throughput was a big topic. You might remember I mentioned the InfiniBand for the centralized setup was 25 gigabytes per second. We were banking on 100 megabytes per second between the client and the server. So a few numbers. 10 seconds was the amount of time required for a forward pass. This is kind of like the most granular operation you have in machine learning. And typically you do 1 forward pass, 1 aggregation, 1 forward pass, 1 aggregation. Well, there's a backward pass, but the cycle goes like that. And the aggregation time should be negligible compared to the time of the forward pass. In our case, the aggregation time took 36 times the amount of time for a forward pass, which would have led to an estimated compute overhead of 85%, which means 85% of the time you're not doing anything except shifting weights back and forth, which is obviously very, very wasteful. And given the price of these GPUs and the amount of energy they consume, we didn't want to do that. In practice, we found that the network throughput was even worse than expected. So it was about 10 megabytes per second. So, from 25 gigabytes to 10 megabytes, that's quite a few orders of magnitude. We were up to 97% compute overhead. This was completely intractable. So obviously we had to do something. So one thing you would do, what we did is change the kind of a local batch size. So I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but essentially you don't have to compute the gradients as often as you would in a centralized setup. So this gave us a bit of leeway, but still wasn't enough to get us to like a reasonable compute overhead. So we had to look into the literature. There's a few things that it's not super plentiful, but there are interesting research avenues into this. For example, you can send only one part of the model, or you can send the model while you're still computing the weights and then aggregate kind of merge them together. We went with something a bit simpler, which is essentially to sync the weights less often. So instead of doing it for every batch, we would do it every 10 batch, for example. So we were a bit worried that this would kind of break the training regime because it was a very delicate training regime in a centralized setup. So we did a bunch of tests, and this is where NVIDIA was quite gracious and got us some compute. So we were able to check this on bots. And we figured out that with 10, it was holding the compute regime. So sorry, the training regime. We could have pushed it a bit further, but we didn't have a ton of tries for this, so we kept it at 10. And even with 10 and these 8 gradient accumulation steps, we went down to 45% compute overhead, which is something we want to get much lower in the future. But nevertheless, it did pretty well. Like we were able to train relatively fast. I think you could do a run in let's say a week, which was good because we only had a month to run this. Finally, checkpointing was a big topic as well, because if you do a run and it crashes, you need to be able to restart it. But the thing is, you need 1 checkpoint per client, given that you store the optimizer states. So a checkpoint was about 6 gigabytes. So 1 checkpoint per epoch per client, it kind of racks up pretty quickly. The main challenge there was doing this kind of out of band so it doesn't add even more overhead to the training. And we were able to do this by leveraging NVFlare's component system. So took a bit of work, but there was some handy tools in there to get us over the line. So yeah, I hope this wasn't too many numbers at once. If you have to remember one, maybe is the 10 megabytes per second throughput. That one definitely was a curveball. So very cool to solve that. Next slide, please. Right. So a big aspect of the work we did was also privacy. So it's one thing to train the model, and it's not a small thing, but if the model leaks data, it's not very useful to the farmers, right? So we had kind of a comprehensive separate thread on assessing the privacy of the federated model. And this is why it goes through like an airlock system where the model is only released if we can prove that, well, if we can agree with the custodians that the model is privacy preserving enough. And this goes through evaluating the literature for different types of attacks and implementing them on these models, which as far as I know is the first time it's been done on co-faulting models. So also a very thrilling kind of engineering challenge there. Can we go to the next slide? Right. All right, full disclosure, I have a bit, don't know that much about that slide, but I'll try to go through it. So in terms of doing all this, there's obviously a technical part. However, it's not the only thing. We also have to go through a lot of like legal and compliance, and this is this is where essentially the product helped us, because we could show that, first of all, on the privacy level, we could show different things from a mathematical perspective, and on the product level, we could show, for example, that you could look at the code, you could guarantee through like that the policies. So we have this concept of asset policy, where the custodian can set different rules. These things, and this actually Roche helped us a lot to develop this. The policies can be signed with keys that we do not see. So even though a Ferris might see the policy and store it, it cannot change it, and the custodian can guarantee that we did not change it. So there's a very strong, like, kind of guarantee that even though a Ferris runs computations and deploys code, we cannot put anything in the pharma network that they did not agree to. Yeah, and I think that's about it. I hope I didn't go over my allotted time, and hopefully there's a couple more minutes for questions.
Yeah, I think we are probably good on that. I'm just wrapping up here. So just one thing to wrap up, and then we have maybe time for a few more questions, is if you want to get kind of access to co-folding models, reach out to us. We've just launched a product based on all the learnings from, let's say, driving adoption of these co-folding models with leading pharma companies. Yeah, if that's of interest, ping us. And with that, I'm stop sharing here and happy to take any final questions if there are any.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Nick. And gave us a lot of insight in terms of how practically to running or training the federations with all the great details. And I think a lot of learning from there as well. So I'm grateful you gave this a presentation. So I can see that some of the, for example, the how to save the GPUs while you do the communications, and especially when the things are idle. We do have several other customers asking for the similar things. So probably something on the Flare side we can think about that, how to resolve that as well. So with that, anybody has questions, please just unmute yourselves, because we don't have a lot of people. I'm sure we can just, instead of typing the questions, you can just speak to it. Yeah, any questions? So so this is kind of pretty cool. I mean, the way, go ahead.
Apologies if, is the audio quality acceptable? Otherwise I can text.
No, that's fine. You're good.
Hi, so I'm Rohit Kare. I used to work with the Federated Learning team at Google a long time ago in a very, very minor way. But one of the challenges I was asking the product person is how to communicate the features and benefits of this algorithm and its properties. I was curious, in this very real world deployment across multiple companies in the AI structural biology space that had their own private perspectives on keeping their data secure, what were some of the lessons learned on how to communicate with different parts of the corporate bureaucracies in this pilot that may have had different approaches or interests? So any anecdotes from talking to security teams, compliance teams, legal teams, research science teams about why Flare would protect them or be in their interests, or the metaphors you had to use? Kind of what was the sales channel challenges, in addition to just the technical challenges of getting this pilot together?
Yeah, great question. And there's not a simple answer to this. So I think, I mean, it all starts with great science and, let's say, the buy-in from these scientists that if this succeeds, it makes a real difference for the end users deploying this for real-world drug discovery programs. And so these initial slides that I shared on the data distributions, you can look into much more, let's say, depth of what are the properties of pharma companies' proprietary data compared to the public domain, and what are the challenges of co-folding models. And so working with essentially these the experts on the pharma side, but as well Dr. Al-Quraishi, who builds these co-folding models, has been critical to get alignment that this is, from a scientific perspective, something worth doing, because if it succeeds, it makes a real difference on the quality of these co-folding models. So that has been the key starting point. Now, based on that and having kind of the buy-in from senior computational drug discovery leaders at multiple pharma companies, then there's the whole stakeholder management, starting from IT, IP risk compliance to, let's say, program management of how do you set this up that from a workload perspective, this is manageable. And so that's a lot of execution. I think it really helped here to have a central party like us coordinating that across all the parties and all the stakeholders within the pharma companies. But I think in terms of buy-in and getting this over the line, it was really the compelling, convincing argument that for this industry problem, the proprietary pharma data will really be a big difference. The science has to be compelling. How does federated learning overcome stakeholder objections? I think, I mean, yeah, I think the key bit on kind of the IP side and privacy protection side was a combination, and we showed that kind of legal, organizational, and technical. So the way this is architected within Affairs is that these things really work hand in hand, right? So you have a legal framework that describes background and foreground IP that you can then map to technical artifacts in the product. And so we essentially aligned all of these stakeholders and went through the legals and the technical and IP considerations at the same time, and that helped a lot. And so they are, let's say, having material across the different levels is really helpful, and mapping legal to technical terms.
I hope that.
Thank you. I love the summary of realizing that it's both. It's not like a blockchain decentralization piece where the papers have to explain it to people, but that the role of your company was essential in creating a centralized legal responsibility under that umbrella. You can talk about the technology.
Indeed.
Yeah, so there's other examples in the real world. For example, Eli Lilly Tune Lab, and they set up the federations, which Eli Lilly essentially, giving out their own proprietary trained models for the startup to work with and fine tuning. Eli Lilly never touched the startup's data, and they go through this federation. So that's one case. Is of course, and go through a lot of legal and a process to enable that. And that was a recent announcement. And there's another example of the drug discovery is this consortium called FATE. Essentially, that's Amgen, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, IBV, and also UCB. And there's 5 of them act together. And as you said, it's like how to buy in. First, the leaderships have to agree to do this consortium, but then they through a long period of time to go through the legal. So and finally start to acting doing that part. The last examples I want to give you is the Cancer AI Alliance, which is went live October 1st. So that was 4 cancer centers in U.S. One is Fred Hutchinson, Dana-Farber, John Hopkins Medical School, and also the Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. So these are 4 major cancer centers that get together. As I said, so how do we get buy-in? First, the leaderships, and they are to get together and to get support from all 3 cloud providers, AWS, Azure, and Google. And so that was, and then also they had support from Deloitte, NVIDIA, and also with the Paul Allen Institute. So they have this consortium together. And of course, they say, hey, how do I get through the legal? Like, for example, medical have something called IRB, the internal review process, right? So they essentially work on for quite a long time from the legal and the review process, make sure all the parties agreed on agreed with the process. But the benefit is like if they go through set up this kind of a platform, the cancer research could be 10 speed up, instead of waiting 4 years for one project, it's kind of 100 projects per month. So that was they realized that it's a legal and regulatory and internal rejections and the security and all that stuff take a long time to go work through. But once you get over this, you have this platform. All of a sudden, all the data scientists and the researchers are kind of leveraging the platform without each project goes through that process. So I hope give that long answer for that question. Anybody else has other questions for Eric and Nick?
I had a question, if I may. Thanks for the great talks. I'm just more curious about these privacy attacks for protein models. Is there any material you're planning to publish in that direction to, give us some more of the details?
Sure. So it's still, let's say, partly still running because you're doing that partly post-hoc. So we did it, of course, across the entire project, but there's still like some privacy validation that is happening. But yes, stay tuned. We'll share more on kind of how that worked and what the reasoning around is.
Maybe a quick follow-up. Yeah, that's great, of course. Looking forward to that. Just from your experience, do you think these attacks are somewhat similar to natural language type large language models, or is there something particular to protein models that needs to be considered?
So I think, if you break it down, it comes down to kind of the typical machine learning attacks, right? Membership inference attacks, model inversion or data reconstruction attacks. However, if you think about how to perform them. There's a lot of kind of nuances around how to apply them to co-folding models. And then second to all, I think there's let's say, there's like within that threat model, you really have to think about what is now from a drug discovery perspective sensitive, and what can you even do with these attacks, right? In some way, this is just a toolbox that an attacker could use, and you can give like some mathematical verification of like this works to this extent or not. But what does it say if a membership inference attack is now feasible with 0.7 likelihood, right? Like if you apply that now to the drug discovery scenario, is that now good or bad? And so that I think is a lot of there are a lot of nuances that are less intuitive than maybe with text or finding something like, I don't know, a ID for patient privacy, right? So
Right.
that's I think the key difference.
Okay, interesting. Thanks.
I saw somebody quickly raise their hands and then withdraw. Anybody has some more questions?
I as well have to jump, unfortunately. I'm getting thrown out of this room, so very sorry. So, yeah.
All right, I think we're about the time. So I saw there's a question on the chat asking, what these slides are available to share? Are you okay sharing the slides?
Yeah, like we'll. I have to quickly check, but I think yes.
Okay, so I also posted 2 links on the Flare Day from last year and this year. So this year the recording haven't uploaded, but I will. So stay tuned. If there's no more questions, well, I'd like to thank the speakers. Robin, thank you so much. Nick, thank you so much, and thank you, Eric, and thank you all the presenters, all the people who are attending stay this long. Until next time, see you. Bye bye.